started. Thank you so much for your patience. We have many vendors outside, so we'll have a break in between panel 1 and panel 2 for you to go outside and get information and kind of network and interact. So bear with us as we get started. Okay, my name is Talia Joyner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I wanted to just start off with saying thank you to everybody for coming. Thank you to Ms. McKinney, to Christine, to Ms. McLean. She's not here right now. They're working a little bit outside. And for all the people that helped here, Ms. McKinney, thank you so much for helping this to happen today. I just want to talk really quickly about the why. As a social worker working with clients, when I first started, I used to hear so many stories about pain, about struggle, about different things that people were going through, and I was a little taken aback to hear how much was happening to people and in the community. And so at the end of the day, I closed my door, move on into my regular life with the hopes that I could kind of shut it off a little bit. And when I got home to relax and I kick back and I look at social media, I noticed that even more things are happening on social media. These were some of the different types of memes that I would see. Just people talking about not being understood, having to smoke just to vent. This was one that really hit home that says, let me tell you how real depression is. There are people alive only because their children are. And that was really impactful for me, especially as a new mom. My son is 2 years old. And so what I was experiencing at work and then what I started seeing on social media, it just hit me that it's really important for us to talk about mental health and to be more open about what's happening, because a lot of people are hurting. And I just felt like it was so important for us to be able to discuss that and have a safe place where we can get information from speakers, which you'll hear today, so I'm not going to take up too much time. And just realizing that even when people say I'm fine, sometimes that's not always the case. And we have to be able to not only use our skill sets in our professional lives, but to also be able to give back and to communicate with people in our community. And so that was one of the inspirations to do this today. I just want to say there are 3 important things that I want to bring up today, but before we get started, this all began from an idea. I was literally just sitting around thinking about making this happen, and we're actually here today in this room together, and I would be remiss if I didn't say how important it is to just start to think about the things that you want to do. This is literally the status that I wrote in 2017 about having an idea, reaching out to other social workers, having people in the community come, and literally that is what is happening. And I never imagined in 2017 that we'd be here right now. So again, it's so important to just start to think about and envision the life you want and the things that you want to happen, because the universe really does start to come together to make those things happen for you. So I could probably talk to you guys all day, but I'm not going to do that because we have panel 1 here, panel 2 here. We have tons of information. But if I had to narrow, and I thought a lot about this, 3 things that I think is so important for people to know, it would be these 3 things. So the first thing that I want everyone to do today is to have an open mind. Mental health is not something that we talk about all the time, and so you are going to hear some new information. You are going to hear some things you might not agree with or that might even trigger you, and so I'm just asking for everyone, when you feel that trigger come up, to just take a breath, know that we're here for good, we're trying to be helpful, and just hear the information out. Just basically being able to listen. So this is long. I'm not going to go through the whole entire thing, but a friend of mine had posted this status, and he was talking about the fact that we do reach out for therapy, but when we reach out for therapy, it might not look like traditional therapy. It might not be us going into a clinician's office and saying, I need to sit for an hour, here's my healthcare card, going to the barber shop and talking, sitting with your friends and venting, crying, running. There might be other things that you're doing that you might not recognize are ways to care for your mental health. So I know that there are some things happening, but again, today we're going to be elaborating on more things that we can do to really talk about the importance of mental health and how we can help ourselves. Okay. So in the spirit again of being open-minded and getting information, I think that somebody wants to come to the presentation today. So in the spirit of being open-minded and hearing information, when you do hear information, it's important to be able to filter what you're hearing and to think, what is this information saying to me and what does it mean? Specifically when we look at the media, one of the things that I wanted to just point out to you here in these different examples is that there are some situations where the media, I don't know if some of you guys remember, I'm getting a little old, but Hurricane Katrina, when the media covered Hurricane Katrina, they described minority people as looting, and then they described white people as finding food. You might also see these examples when people are protesting. You might hear black people being referred to as thugs, and then white people being referred to as rowdy. And it's just important for us, again, to have an open mind when we're thinking about our mental health and how information impacts us, because it's important to say, what is this information trying to say to me? What does it mean? Sometimes we read media, we read articles, and it sounds like facts to us. But again, it's important to just slow things down and say, how factual is this? What is this information saying, and what does it mean? Okay. Another topic for me that often hits home is when I hear in the media this term black on black crime. This for me is something that has an effect on clients and people that I work with, specifically young people, because it gives them the feeling that there's something inherently wrong with them, that black people are hurting other black people or minorities are hurting other minorities. And it's important to understand that crime happens more so because of proximity than it does because of who we are. If the people who you know and the people who you communicate with look like you, and we do live in largely segregated areas, it has a lot to do with people who are near you and not so much so because of who you are. So again, this open-mindedness is important because it gives you a larger perspective to view situations. So again, when I hear black on black crime or Hispanic on Hispanic crime, I think more so, are these crimes of people who are close to one another, or is it because of their race and who they are? And obviously I think it's the former. The second thing that I want to talk about is trauma. I know this isn't the most exciting slide, but I really wanted to get this information in because trauma is a word that we use a lot. You hear it at the emergency room, you might hear it on TV, you might hear your friends talking about trauma, but trauma is a very real thing. Trauma has a lot to do with what we experience day to day and how those day-to-day experiences affect us. For example, you might hear a female say, all men are dogs. Has that female dated all men? No. But that one experience or that second experience or maybe an experience with a father or a relative can cause you to have a view of all people just based on one experience. And so it's really important to understand what trauma is and how trauma affects us. And when you talk about therapy, trauma and dealing with your trauma in therapy is a really excellent way to understand who you are and how the situations that you went through have impacted you and how they might be causing you to suffer some uncomfortable feelings basically in your life. The last thing, and one of the things that I'm very passionate about, is the importance of studying history. So some people might say, what does history have to do with mental health? How are those two things connected? History is important because we are a part of a greater whole. It's like a leaf is a part of a tree. It's like a droplet is a part of a large body of water. We're not just individuals, we're people that are a part of circumstances that have led us to where we are. And again, that's something honestly that's been a coping strategy for me to understand history, and it's also something that I use with my clients. One of the things that I hear clients and persons that I'm working with say is like, people are always hating on me, or I feel like, I'm in this situation because my family doesn't work hard enough, or I want to be different than, the other black people around me. And so some of the stories and some of the things I hear are often to do in some part because there's a disconnection from who they are and then an understanding of history. When it comes to studying, as you guys know, we have museums, we have articles, we have all types of information that studies who we are. You can read literature and information, but it's important also for us to engage in our own study about who we are, who your family is, and where you come from. And again, grounding ourselves in these ways is certainly a way to calm yourself, to feel more balanced, and to have more understanding of where you are. And again, that's something for me that is very useful. I just wanted to pull up two little examples of a situation that happened in 1920 when African American and Native persons were trying to vote. And during that voting, there was a massacre to discourage people from being able to vote. So fast forward, when we talk about here in 2019, people not seeing the importance of voting and not wanting to vote, it makes me think in some ways, has there been an historical impact? Have there been reasons that people do not want to vote? Have they felt like their vote doesn't matter? And again, when you go back just a little bit in history, you'll see that there were many circumstances and times where people were trying to vote and were trying to be interactive, and I was very much so discouraged. So again, when I see these things happening now, I think about the historical context, and I don't look at it as something that makes me feel less of a person or that my community is not concerned. There was also a story, this picture just, I guess, struck me because I have a little one at home. But I think about how much that I care about them and how much I love them. And in this picture, women who were pregnant in the late 1800s, actually, if they were incarcerated or if they got into a legal situation, their children would be taken away from them. And again, when I just think about the things that have happened in history, it gives me a broader perspective of why we're here today. So I won't spend too much time on the historical piece because, again, I know it's something that I'm very passionate about, but if you just go back to look at periods of time in our history when people were trying to build, you have Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where there were businesses, supermarkets, pharmacies, and at that time it was bombed. This was meaningful a lot for me because in recent history, there was the shooting in Vegas, and some people were referring to the Vegas shooting as one of the largest shootings or the largest mass deaths. And I couldn't help but think to myself, there have been other situations where this has happened. And again, I think it's important to put things in context because it gives you a larger understanding. This is another clip about there being peaceful groups meeting in the 60s and 70s, and then those groups being incited on purpose with riots. And again, when I go to community functions or I go to large parties or events and I say, like, why don't people come together peacefully? What causes these things to happen? For me, grounding myself in a historical understanding helps things to make sense. This picture I thought was meaningful because it talks about us becoming family, us working together. And in some way, I see today as a way for us to come together. You guys don't have to be here. You could have been anywhere else. Us being here, talking about our mental and emotional health All of our speakers have come today for free. They're not being paid. And in this way, to me, this is us coming together. And I feel like these types of meetings are an important piece of helping us contribute to our collective growth. All right, this I thought was impactful. I won't spend too much time again, but it talks about in 1965, which is recent history. I know my mom was born in the 60s. There were laws implemented that said that the father couldn't be in the home. And from 1965 to 1990, we saw an extreme decrease in the amount of two-parent families. So again, these types of things, when I'm talking to my clients about growing up in a single family, a single-parent family, and how that came to be and how we got there, again, understanding these dynamics helps to put it in a larger context. Okay, so I know talking about history for some people can be kind of difficult. Some people don't like to reflect on the past because it's hard to hear some of the information. But the important thing is that with the knowledge, we're able to move forward more productively, more proactively. One of the examples that I like to use with clients is that if someone is ill and you're giving them Robitussin and you're giving them tea and you're massaging their shoulders and you're trying your best to take care of them and nothing is working, and then they say to you, but my leg is broke. It's like you're helping somebody, but not necessarily in the way that they need help. So for me, having an understanding of how we got here and why your life is the way it is a really helpful strategy for moving forward. So I'll just read this and we'll wrap up so that we can hear from our speakers. It says, you master your spirit when you no longer take the cheap path of pacifying your pain with counterfeit fulfillment, but rather enjoy the process of seeking out that which brings permanent transformation, character development, and wholeness. And I think that by addressing our own personal traumas, our own experiences, also taking a look at the larger world, I think are key pieces to us being able to live our best life and have the life that we want. That last one says that I'm willing to do the mental work for a positive change. And it is just that, it's work, but it is positive in the end. So thank you. So without further delay, we will have our first speaker. Our first speaker is Tiffany. I've had the pleasure of interacting with Tiffany. When I told her about this event, she was excited to get on board. She's been supportive to me. We've talked about this. She's planned community programs and she's done a lot of work in the community. So I'm really happy to have Tiffany here. And without further ado, we'll have Tiffany Walker speak.
Thank you, Talia, for having me. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Let's try that again. Right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. That's great. I'm so happy to be here. I'm happy to share a little bit about myself. My name is Tiffany Walker. I work in Essex County in East Orange as a school social worker, and I also work as an outpatient therapist for a private practice in West Orange. In addition to that, I want to give you a little bit of context about how I started working in the community and what it is that I do and why it's important in terms of building mental health literacy amongst our communities, particularly communities of color. I have a nonprofit that I started in 2016 called Pathways Toward Peace. The goal and the mission of the nonprofit is to provide mental health training to faith-based organizations and communities. And I thought that was important because my personal experience and experiences amongst my family, oftentimes when we are in crisis, we flock to houses of worship or we flock to houses of faith, right? For many of us, our spirituality is a practice of self-care. But what I found was that there was a big gap in terms of having those individuals recognize the true signs and symptoms of mental health issues and even being connected with resources to refer people out. So on the macro level of my work, that's what I do. I go into organizations, I provide churches, mosques, whoever is open to me, I provide those trainings where we're actually working to build the literacy. So individuals are learning the true signs and symptoms of common mental health issues and how to support an individual until they can be connected to professional help. How to have language around behaviors that you're noticing, how to have language around symptoms that you're seeing and how to connect it to a particular issue is not to diagnose, but it really is to inform and to really increase the knowledge we have amongst the community. On a micro level, as a practitioner, I specialize and like to work with millennials, particularly millennials of color, millennial women of color. And so if I were to just talk about the video that Talia showed, and we talk about trauma and the impact that trauma has on our community, many of us have experienced some either adulthood or childhood trauma. Oftentimes when we hear about trauma, we think historically PTSD, survivors of sexual assault and abuse, but that language and that context has changed and the definition has really broadened over time. So now we're looking at individuals or children who have grown up in extreme poverty, or perhaps they live in a neighborhood that is extremely violent. Perhaps they've witnessed sexual assault or sexual abuse or a traumatic violent occurrence. Perhaps they've been in a major car accident. Or even when you think about what it may be for individuals who come from vulnerable communities and they pursue a secondary education and a career, and they begin to work in an environment and they are managing microaggressions and they're managing, racism, and how that impacts their psyche and how that impacts their emotional well-being. And so what happens is, if you are an individual who have had any type of trauma and it has not been treated, your equity, right, when we saw the video, everybody started at the same page. Depending on their experiences, they were either allowed to move forward or stay where they are. If you had trauma-based experiences, what happens is your ability to navigate relationships or maintain a healthy concept of self is challenged. And therapy is a great place to be able to really process that. It's a great place to really be able to identify your triggers, and it's a great place to really redefine who you are and shift the narrative outside of the trauma that you've experienced. So when it comes to developing mental and emotional health, I think it's important that we all have a self-care plan. And for those who are interested in taking that step and participating in therapy so that you can explore that work. And so despite the challenges or the experiences, you have the keys and the tools to really manage what, quite frankly, isn't an equitable race, but you still have to run it, right? And so it's one thing to expect somebody to run a race with a broken leg. It's another thing to have a person have access to rehabilitation, to reconstruct their legs, the tissue, and then to be able to run the race again. And in some ways, that's what therapy provides. So I'm really, really happy to be here, and I look forward to any of the questions that you guys may have.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Christine Brown, and I am a licensed clinical social worker. I was a student before I became a licensed clinical social worker, sitting in similar seats like so many of you all, visitors as well of the facility. Thank you so much. I am also the co-coordinator with Talia with this event, and when she posted it on Facebook, I was so inspired, and I just, we ran through it with a couple of months. We persevered, we had a lot of hiccups, but it came to fruition. So I'm so grateful for you all being here, giving us your time, and I'm so grateful for all the panelists that we had. Years ago, when I left social work school, I needed a job in the middle of the recession, and I was hired at this agency, Project 99, that provides in-home counseling and behavioral, help children with their behaviors and help families. And my clinical supervisor at the time was Kristen Miller, who I'm gonna ask this week, who I am so honored who agreed to come here today. When I first began when I left social work school, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue on what I needed to work on. So I needed a lot of guidance, and I was so open to guidance, and she helped me. From the time I left social work school about 10 years ago to now, it's just a continuing education on myself and the work that I can, and how I can make the work that I do fulfilling and helpful and efficient to the people that I service. I am a full-time clinical social worker, hospice social worker, excuse me. And full-time hospice, I go and I provide services in people's homes, wherever their homes are. Their private homes, nursing facilities, I've even visited people in basements. And the one thing I've noticed in our community, in this community, is how there are issues and fears with dealing with mental health. Labels that we fear may be placed upon us. And I am an example of a person who had fears of labels. And within my own family, within myself, I had to look at different symptoms that I had. I had to look at the roles that were placed on me as a young, not so young anymore, Black woman, residing in New Jersey. So now I'm going to just ask Kristen to come up and speak, and I'm going to actually ask the rest of the speakers to just come up and speak. Or do you want to sit down? You want to continue to sit down? However you guys want to do it. If you want to come up and speak or sit down, if you're comfortable, however you want to do it. And I just want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to come up again, but right now I'm going to let Kristen take the mic. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I consider it a blessing and a privilege to be here this morning, so thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to be part of this event. So Christine wanted me to share a little bit about my journey as a social worker and some of the things that I do. So I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be a therapist. I have many extended family members who have various mental health diagnoses, schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, as well as addiction issues. And so as a young person, I thought the only path to doing that was psychology. So I attended a university where I lived in a dorm that was part of a social justice college. And so college for me was really the place where I really began to have a deeper level of understanding around issues of social justice, and particularly became interested in issues related to racism and racial disparities, especially as related to health and mental health. So most of my career has been here in Newark. I started out at an HIV agency, and my supervisor there was a social worker and really encouraged me to pursue social work as a career. And what really sets social work apart from other mental health disciplines is really the focus on social justice. And specifically as social workers, the commitment to serving marginalized and oppressed populations. So as I transitioned to graduate school, I began working at the Challenge program, which is literally right up the street on South Orange Avenue, part of what used to be UMDNJ, in a partial hospitalization program for children ages 5 to 18 with really intense and severe emotional and behavioral challenges. So the average person going to therapy goes maybe once a week, every 2 weeks for about an hour. These were youth that were coming to treatment 3.5 hours a day, 5 days a week, for anywhere from 6 months to a year. And so one of the things that I immediately saw in the program was extensive amounts of trauma, that no matter what the diagnosis was, almost all of the children and families that we worked with did experience trauma. And as Tiffany was sharing, I think it's really important to look at trauma broadly, not just physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, but divorce as being a trauma, a woman having a miscarriage as being a trauma, neglect as a child, emotional and verbal abuse, incarceration of family members. All of these things are traumas. And so the problem isn't experiencing trauma, right? Because trauma is a universal experience. Every person sitting in this room has experienced some type of trauma. The problem is when we don't recognize it, and we don't recognize the ways that we think and behave are actually quite connected to various traumatic experiences that we have endured. And so many of the people that I work with have unresolved childhood trauma, and when they're coming in for therapy as an adult, they're not really connecting it to early experiences that they had. And that's part of what the therapy process can do, really help people to understand how their different life experiences have shaped who they are. And one of the really unique things about the Challenge program was that talking about issues related to race was really woven into the fabric of the program. So I became very comfortable talking about a subject that's uncomfortable, especially for many white people to talk about. And so I think for people who are thinking about pursuing therapy, one of the things that's really important to think about is, you know, who would you be most comfortable sharing with? And I think of a client that I work with now, whose caregiver is an African-American woman. She had just taken in an 18-year-old biracial female, and somebody had recommended me to see this 18-year-old for therapy. And so she reached out to me, we had our conversation, and I always ask people, you know, do you have any questions for me? And she said, no. She said, you know, you're a Christian and you're Black, so those are really the only two things that were important to me. And so again, if I wasn't comfortable talking about issues of race, right, I might have just become quiet in this conversation. So I said to her, I am a Christian, because I often do get clients who are reaching out specifically wanting to bring their faith into the therapy space. But I said, I need to let you know that I'm white. And so she kind of started, you know, fumbling for her words, and I basically said, I think what you are saying is you want to be taking this young lady to a professional who's going to create the space for her to be able to talk about her racial experience, right? Because if we're looking broadly at trauma, racism is a trauma, right? Microaggressions are trauma. And so I said, if it's important to you that the person is also Black, I totally respect that. And she said, no, you came recommended. And so I do continue to see this young lady. But I share that story because I think it's important for each person to decide what's really important for you. And so for some people of color, it is really important that they connect with a professional of color. But I think some of the things that are most important to look for are a person who is authentic and who's gonna create space in therapy for you to talk about all the different layers of your identity. So whether that's race and ethnicity, whether that's gender, whether that's spirituality, therapy really should be a safe place for you to talk about all of your varied life experiences, and to really develop insight and self-awareness about, you know, why you do the things you do, why you think the way you think. And it's also a great place to learn tools, ways to cope. And so again, with trauma being universal, you know, I see a diverse client base in the practice that I currently have in Springfield, New Jersey, as well as Saddlebrook. And the name of the practice that I just co-started with a friend is called Mosaic. And that was very purposeful in this idea that we're all broken, we all have brokenness, but that a mosaic is something beautiful that's made out of broken pieces. So that idea that if you're brave enough to engage in therapy, which is very uncomfortable and scary, you can really create a meaningful and whole life if you're willing to do your work.
So we're going to have Tyrone speak, but before he speaks, I wanted to introduce Mr. Tariq Kenny, who we have in the back of the room. He is the Essex County Surrogate. Thank you so much for coming out. If you could just say a few words really quickly about what it is that your office provides and what kind of services, that would be really, really helpful.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Tariq Kenny. I serve as your Essex County Surrogate. So the Surrogate's office is a very interesting office. The office is something that you probably wouldn't be aware of until you actually need it. We're responsible for probating wills, doing estates. We also do adoptions, and two of my colleagues are in the back, Rayan and Sarah, wave your hands. They're responsible for our adoptions, so they actually went to court on behalf of our office to make sure adoptions that happen throughout the county are actually done the right way and legally. We also deal with what we call administrations and guardianships. So guardianships is something that might relate to today's conversation, and which means is that if a person is incapacitated, a person cannot function at a high level, we make sure that you are in court. We identify a guardian. The courts identify a guardian, whether it's family members and or an attorney, to handle your estate. You cannot do it on your own functionally. And so that's what our responsibilities are in today's conversation. And what we also do is we also make sure that we have an outreach arm in which we talk to people throughout the county about something that we probably don't plan for, which is called a will. By show of hands, anybody in this room has a will? Anybody in this room has a will? Don't worry about you not raising your hand. It's because 47% of Americans in this country do not have wills. In populations of color, is actually less than that. And so the reason why I'm saying that is because when we're talking about, and I think Ms. Talia mentioned this earlier, is about transferring wealth, is how do we actually create wealth in this generation and then transfer that wealth to our next generation, thank you much. And one of it is called estate planning. And so what we do is we go out and talk to people about estate planning, talk about wills, and talk about sort of these things that we don't have conversations on. And so we're here simply just to support this conversation about mental health. It's because we see it from a very extreme side. We see it where we literally talk to superintendents in school districts about how do we identify families who may have a child who might be 17, 18 years of age, who may be looking for adult guardianships. How do we identify and help that family become a guardian for that child who now has become an adult for the rest of their lives, so they can make sure they have a responsible person that cares for them going forward. So I read the bios of your panel. You have some great people, especially Mr. Day. So use this conversation, but as you have this conversation, talk to other people in your family, talk to other people in your community about mental health, how we can deal with the things that happen to us, but also how we can help resolve issues that happen to us that we typically ignore because we think it's something that we can't treat. Thank you for this conversation.
He gave a little mini introduction for Tyrone Day, but I'd just like to say that I heard Tyrone speak. He came to my job to speak to the young people. They were really connected to what he had to say, and so I've been communicating with him for quite some time. He was excited to come here, and so it's just been a pleasure how excited everybody has been to be here. And without further ado, I'll give you Tyrone.
So before we start, I just want to do a little exercise right quick. So I want everybody just to inhale, exhale out. Inhale, exhale out. One more time, inhale, exhale out. Now let's thank God and the powers that be that wasn't our last breath. Peace and light. My name is Tyrone Day. I am the former senior aide to the Honorable Mayor Rasbig J. Baraka, and now I am the new attendance counselor for Newark Public Schools. In addition with that, I actually just passed my exam now. I'm a certified life coach. I specialize, thank you. I specialize in trauma, mental health, health and relationships, and health and wellness. In addition with a couple businesses as well. One business around the health and wellness is called Mind, Body, and Soul, where I take people to the park every weekend and align them spiritually, mentally, and physically through fitness. From calisthenics, yoga, meditation, and just ending in with a healing circle. to provide a safe space for people that won't be judged or belittled, and everybody can be themselves and achieve their goals, and we create testimonies. In addition, with King's Motivation Project, where I go speak to middle schools, high schools, colleges, jail cells, and private functions, to young men of color about financial literacy, career development, mental health, healthy relationships, and what it takes to be a black king in society today. So with that being said, Dr. Martin King once said, the ultimate measure of a man is not when he stands in the moments of comfort and convenience, but when he stands at times of triumph and controversy. By a show of hands, how many people in here can say they love themselves? And that's fine if you did not raise your hand, because I just started loving myself not so long ago. In 2018, I was hit with a series of snowball effect events that occurred in my life. From being unemployed, losing one of my dear friends at a young age of a heart attack, family issues, and toxic relationships. To the point of a stolen car or a drive-by came through, I felt like it was my time to die. I didn't know what to do with myself anymore. I didn't even know who I was. And as a man, I felt that it was hard to speak about my problems. And I didn't realize I was being so toxic to everybody else. I was fighting, I just didn't know what to do. So then, I took myself to therapy. And I just want all the men of color in here, there's nothing wrong with going to therapy. Because I used to just say, oh, you know, therapy is just for people that, no, we all need therapy in some type of way. And then actually talking to my therapist, I didn't realize how much backed up trauma I had in my life. To the point I seen more caution tape than ribbon cuttings. To the point I seen more funerals than weddings. But that's okay. Because at the end of the day, I'm still here. Because God said that He never said that the weapons wouldn't be formed against us. He just promised that they wouldn't prosper. And I live by that every day. So outside of therapy, I had to find things that made me happy, made me feel loved. So I started going back to the gym, started doing kickboxing, started doing yoga to create balance between those two. Started going to church every Sunday, started going to Bible study, and also I do spoken word. And I realized that I had to create new environments for me. But not just new environments, create new friendships, be around like-minded individuals. Because right now, we're probably in environments right now that are unhealthy for us. We're probably around people that we shouldn't be around. But we tend to sit there and hold on to these people. But what we really don't understand, we're holding on to animals. We're holding on to people that's dead weight, that's holding us back from walking in our purpose. But you know what, that's okay, because you know it's probably not your season to experience that yet. And I have too much pain to realize that I need to take my power back. I needed to take my energy back. And one thing that was big about me was my emotional intelligence piece. And this is why I tell all my young men that this is why women are the smartest human beings in the world, and we're meeting them 75-25 because we don't know who we are. How can I be whole with someone if I'm not whole with myself? How can I have a relationship and put a woman in my house to create value when she's bringing wood to knot up an abandoned building? So at the end of the day, we need to really start focusing on ourselves. And we're never going to be 100%, not at all. And that's why, one thing I would say, would I disagree with that video? I'm not running a race. This is a marathon I'm in. I'm taking my time, because slow progress is still progress. Nobody can tell you how to live your life but you. Remember that. And one piece about the health and wellness that actually saved me, when I realized it actually decreased my mental health illnesses that I had. Because on Science Daily, they said on average, participants that do not work out suffer from 3.4% of mental health every month, compared to people that do work out that only have to deal with 2.0%, which is 42.3% that you could be saving yourself just from doing some type of exercise. Rather it's running, walking, like I said, meditation, yoga, just some type of forward movement. But just moving on, I'm talking about action, right? And I know a lot of people live by action speaks louder than words, correct? So for example, what am I doing right now? I'm showing action, right? I'm moving, right? But sometimes your actions are not showing what you're trying to explain. I'm moving, but I'm not going left, I'm not going right, I'm not going forward, I'm not going backward, I'm still stagnant, I'm in one place. So if you're going to sit there and show action, make sure you're doing it by forward movement. Stop being stagnant. But the thing about it is, you have to experience that when it's your time. So with that being said, I just want you to know that I'm claiming everybody's victory to win today. Whatever you're going through right now, you are not alone. If you need assistance with structure, systems, an accountability person to sit there and assist you, I'm here. That's what my job as a life coach is, to assist people in all those type of daily mantras. And I want to end with this. Stop worrying about what you look on paper, how you look like on paper, and start worrying about how you look like with your actions. Stop hanging around drains and start hanging around faucets. Stop practicing free will and start practicing His will. And stop claiming yourself to be the victim and start claiming your victory right now. So before you go to sleep at night, I want you to put your slippers under the bed. And then when you wake up in the morning, you have to get on your knees to reach them. My name is Tyrone Day. I appreciate just for being here today to be around y'all beautiful souls. And just know, once again, you are not alone. And we're all going to get to our destination together, because our current situation is not our final destination. Thank you. Excuse me, I apologize. And if you need to follow me on social media, I'm pretty much on Instagram. It's IAMTYDAYE. That's IAMTYDAYE. And I thank you for all of the speakers that came before me, and that's going to go after me. And thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyrone. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the speakers before him. And last but not least, I have this other speaker, Jean, who I found on the internet as I was looking for black male therapists to attend. I also watched his Bergen Community Headed TEDx speak, and I thought that he was just so informative and just really, really relatable. And one of the things that he focused on is gender roles. And I know for me, growing up, I had a lot of a lot of responsibility. I'm the oldest of five children, and the rest of them are boys. And the responsibilities that I took in helping to take care of my brothers and having to break that pattern. And so when I read about what he provided, the type of therapy, gender roles that we take on, and it's just patterns, generational patterns, and how it's okay to try to break it, or sometimes how we are, aren't given a chance to break it, or even acknowledge it, how that can also be a trauma for us. Tyrone, when he talked about it, how being a male, you're not supposed to seek therapy, you're not supposed to show any emotion, you're not supposed to have any issues, you know, yet he was strong enough and brave enough to go and seek out a therapist. So that is just brave on anyone. It is a scary thing to seek out a therapist. I'm telling you as a therapist and as a person who sought out her own therapist, because it is one of the scariest things to do. It is one of the, to put in all the different things that we hear as people. You know, I know growing up for me, and I grew up in the 80s, was that if you were seeking a therapist, you crazy. If you had any emotional issue, we call it nervous breakdown. You know, that person had a nervous breakdown. You know something wrong with them, but you know they keep on going after such and such. You ain't gonna never get right. That's what I heard. And so learning how to identify that, no, that was a trauma. No, that what happened, my brothers, things that happened with them, things that happened with me, things that happened to my mom and my dad, things that happened to my friends. Everything, these different things, no, I was a victim. And I had to acknowledge that so that I can become victorious, so that I can say that, no, I am strong and I can help other people. I know what to do. So now I'm going to introduce our last speaker of this first panel, Gene Semelfort Jr. Just so honored to have you here. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm gonna let you take the mic.
Thank you for having me here. So as stated, my name is, thank you. I appreciate the claps, they make me feel nice. So as stated, my name is Gene Semelfort. If folks want to call me Jean, that's fine as well. I am Haitian American. My family was born in Haiti. I'm born here. I'm the youngest of two older sisters, so yes, I am the spoiled brat in the family. And being the only male in the family, particularly in a Caribbean household, I'm even more spoiled. But nonetheless, I say all these things as a description. I was born and raised in Newark, New Jersey, attended Arts High, and my first, well, I thought I was going to be a singer, but then I realized that everybody wants to be a singer. So my second thing was kind of the thing around mental health. And one of the things that kind of brought me to that was just growing up in the dynamic that I grew up in. One, kind of the hyper-aggressive culture that you witness, particularly in impoverished communities. The other thing was also witnessing my sisters be survivors of sexual assault, interpersonal violence. And so I myself identify as a co-survivor because I was one of their biggest supporters or emotional support persons. And I think at a young age, I had a kind of a knack for tuning in to what my sisters was going through, so they saw me as a person to talk to, and that's the thing that I kind of just maintained throughout my years. I've always had an appreciation for supporting and helping folks, but one of the things that changed for me specifically was I wanted to think about prevention, and so prevention while also providing supportive services. So one of the things that I do is I work at Princeton University doing prevention work around sexual violence, interpersonal violence, doing education on masculinity or thinking about healthy masculinity, but then also thinking about healthy relationship dynamics. The other thing that I do also is have a private practice in Montclair where it's important for me to stay in Essex County to provide services. I'm a licensed professional counselor, is my specific licensure. So when I was thinking about this conversation, one of the things I realized is that my niche or my area of, I guess, somewhat expertise, I don't like to call myself an expert, but because it's still ever evolving, is looking at gender dynamics and how they intersect with mental health issues. So I am a black male, and thinking about mental health therapy when I was coming up, that wasn't something that was, I would say, open for me, in a way of just saying it's okay for you to go and seek emotional support. If anything, the things that I've learned was that as a man, right, you gotta toughen up, You pretty much got to suppress any emotions. If anything, I learned that emotions was connected with weakness. And if I showed those emotions, right, that somehow made me a potential victim for any harm. And so I learned to bottle up those emotions and I learned to hide them. If anything, I think most folks from Newark or any kind of hood area, we all got a grit. You know what I mean by grit? When it says we have this look that we don't smile, we don't say good morning, we just kind of look almost like tough in a way to say, hey, leave me alone, don't bother me. And so I realized that's actually a trauma response, right? And so one of the pieces of that is that we are operating in dynamics that we have to be so protective of ourselves, right? That in some way, shape, or form, we also kind of close off ourselves from tuning in with our emotional dynamics. And so when I looked at gender and thinking about masculinity in particular, I think about all the things that I've learned as a man and how I want to help other men specifically think about the ways in which they can address it in a way that's non-toxic to themselves and then also not harmful to other individuals, right? And so when we're thinking about masculinity, we want to dismantle all of the ideas that we've internalized. We want to adopt new ideas. And so the terminology man box is not something that I've coined. This is actually by an individual by the name of Tony Porter. And so that men operate in kind of this box, right? Like these are the things that we can do. And then once we step outside of that box, there's these things that are set up outside of them to pretty much shoot us back into that box. Does that make sense? Right? And so one of the things we want to do is get rid of the box, right? And we don't want men to identify or think that they have to just operate by these characteristics, but instead they can actually expand upon those characteristics, and that's actually healthy expression of just humanity. One of the other pieces when I'm thinking about mental health, right, and I don't want to be redundant because I think like the speakers before me said a lot of great things, but one of the things that popped up for me is when we think about transgenerational trauma, right? And so transgenerational trauma in a sense is this idea that I don't have to be the direct recipient of that trauma to be impacted by that trauma. So I like to tell folks, I've adopted my mother's paranoia, right? My mother is a paranoid, hypervigilant Haitian woman, right? Very great, right? I love her to death, right? But I've adopted that paranoia, right? And I think one of the reasons in which I adopted that paranoia is because it was so ingrained in her teachings and the way in which she raised me, right? And so it's to always keep my head on a swivel, right? Kind of don't trust anyone, right? Literally, don't trust anyone. And including that, right, is also mental health practitioners or any outside practitioners that operate outside the family. Right, so when we're thinking about even Black communities and thinking about mental health, right, we're asking folks to engage in vulnerable practices that counter any of the things that you learned about being a Black or a Black and Latinx person in this space, right? When we're thinking about transgenerational trauma, even kind of the climate of what's going on, right, around immigration issues, right? Thinking about how that passes down in this sort of hypervigilance or paranoia that develops from that, right? But then not actually having the space to process those emotional things because we're in a constant mood of survival. And so mental health in which the way I look at it is like the opportunity to jump out of survival mode and take a break, right? I think we need a break and we also need an opportunity to process those things. The other piece of mental health, and when I think about intersecting identities, is thinking about how, right, when we look at ethnicity or race, right, there's so many intersecting identities in that. So we have Black communities, right, but within Black communities, we have other identities, right? We have Caribbean identities, we have African American identities. We also have LGBTQ folks that operate in these spaces, right? Whether it's Black communities or Latinx communities, right? And how do we create safe spaces that actually acknowledge, right, the various folks that are holding community with us? And how do we also identify or address like our own mental health issues in a way, in identifying how it impacts other people, right? And so I like to talk about these things because I think for many of us, right, our identity specifically has come with a great deal of harm or issues, right? As a male-identified person, I do not know what it's like to walk in the shoes of a female-identified person. I have no clue, right? And there's also a recognition that with some of my male identity, right, there's a set of privileges that I have as well. And so when I think about my identity, I also think about how does my identity show up in a therapeutic space, right? Because I think a lot of us have been identified as clinicians because there's some, or service providers or support persons in these spaces because there's a recognition that there's not a lot of us that are occupying these spaces, right? Nonetheless, right, we still don't encompass all the identities that are even sitting in this room. And so I think one of the clinical practices or thinking, particularly for folks that are thinking about being therapists or clinicians themselves, is really getting an understanding of your own identity, what that means for you and how that shows up in other spaces, right? Because one of the things I've realized is as a man, particularly providing services for mostly female-identified folks, right, recognizing that I need to be very aware of how I hold space, and I need to be extremely aware of what things may come up for them as they're interacting with me, all right? The other thing that I think about is when I think about gender, right, and dismantling things, particularly for men, right, is giving men an opportunity to also identify as sexual assault survivors, right, or experiencing sexual violence. Unfortunately, right, because acknowledging sexual violence is almost counterintuitive to the thing of masculinity, right? Like, I'm kind of hard body, nobody, I don't get hurt, right? When we think about sexual violence, it's such a vulnerable and violating experience, and I think for a lot of us men, we don't actually want to connect with that, but recognizing that there's a good percentage of us men who deal with those issues, right? And do we allow space for us to process that and talk about that, right? So I talk about all these kind of things is recognizing that, as Tiffany stated, right, kind of my micro piece is the individual sessions, but my macro piece is also rooted in social justice. I believe a lot of my things come from both the clinical practice of like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy stuff, yada, 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 but then also like infusing like very Black feminist thoughts, right, and literature and how I'm addressing these things. So I try to see myself as a holistic provider as best as possible, and I try to tackle things from all angles as much as I possibly can. While also recognizing that there's some things that I may not, right, hit on for folks, and that's okay. I think we all recognize that we're not the therapist for everyone, right? We're not the service provider for everyone, right? I think we try to help and assist as many folks as we possibly can, but that it's okay for folks to see that maybe, we're not the best fit for them, but we'll definitely connect them with individuals. So I kind of want to just leave you all with like the idea of like thinking about your identities, what that means for you, recognizing your own trauma, right? Even working towards acknowledging it as trauma, and then also thinking about what self-care means for you as folks of color, right? As just people in this place, right? I think self-care is one thing that we don't necessarily talk about too much, and I appreciate Mr. Day's kind of mind, body, and soul dynamic, but thinking about what does that mean for you, right, in that space? What does boundaries mean for you? Because I think boundaries is the practice of self-care, right? Thinking about, right, health, right? So you don't need to run 3 miles, right? Maybe you're walking 3 miles at your own pace, and that's fine, right? What does movement look like for you, right? And what does fostering healthy relationships look like for you with other folks? And how do you yourself allow yourself to go into a place, right, to go into that swamp, or to go into that like messy closet? I think all of us, maybe not all of us, have that messy closet that we just dread going through and cleaning out and organizing. But think about how do you actually take that time and opportunity and space to do that. But once again, thank you all for having us and hosting us. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and definitely look forward to any of your questions. Thank you.
We not only have speakers here giving information, we also have information tables in the lobby. A brief break for us to visit the tables and to come back in, and then we'll be able to hear from panel 2